Hello everyone! Today we're going to talk about an old science fiction movie that's a little lesser known, 1953's The Magnetic Monster. Richard Carlson plays Dr. Jeffrey Stewart, one of a team of A-men dedicated to studying atomic energy at the newly formed Office of Scientific Investigation. A strange complaint of magnetism at a local hardware store leads to the discovery of a highly radioactive new element. Soon, the experts realize that as this dangerous element consumes energy, it grows bigger and demands even more energy, and its massive hunger poses a threat that could soon destroy the Earth. If you just listened to that summary and your eyes glazed over a bit, I get it. As 1950s sci-fi monster movies go, it doesn't sound like the most exciting premise, but while this one's a little different from some, it is a good movie and surprisingly entertaining. I say surprisingly because it does get off to a dry start. The film is partly done docudrama style, with Dr. Stewart's narration setting the scene, explaining the department he works for, introducing nuclear concepts. It's an awful lot of exposition to dump on the audience in those vital first 10 minutes of runtime when you're trying to get them hooked. But the narration does establish a serious tone, a sense of realism, and an understanding that time is going to be important in this story. Plus, despite the dull and talky beginning, when things do start happening, they unfold in an amusing way, thanks to the variety of characters and the dialogue. Our leading man, Richard Carlson, was very busy in 1953. He starred in two other spooky sci-fi movies that year, It Came from Outer Space and The Maze. These are worthy films as well. I particularly enjoyed The Maze, unusual as it is. And then the following year, he was in one of my personal favorites, Creature from the Black Lagoon. Richard Carlson is a staple of the genre, and it's always a pleasure to bump into him. And in case you're wondering, I have reviewed all of those movies. When he's not in the lab, Dr. Stewart is fussing over his wife, played by Jean Byron. She's 4 months pregnant, but not gaining any weight, so he keeps trying to fatten her up. Byron and Carlson have a lot of cute banter. He's very charming, and they act like newlyweds, taking forever to say goodbye when he's going to work and all of that. Later, they have a couple sweet and funny scenes where they discuss buying a house, and he's excited to have a fat, sassy baby. They're both quite likable, and while this subplot doesn't do much more than develop his character, which is important, and pave the way for a kind of weak analogy later on, it's fun. Carlson also has some badinage with the operator at the office, who is played by none other than Kathleen Freeman. It was just a couple weeks ago that I talked about her role as Lena Lamont's diction coach in Singin' in the Rain. And here she is again. She and Carlson have some lighthearted exchanges. And here's another crazy coincidence. Another scientist working in the lab is played by King Donovan, who I recognized, but I couldn't put my finger on where from, so I cheated and looked him up. And I probably know him most from Invasion of the Body Snatchers, but he also appeared in Singin' in the Rain, playing the publicity guy in charge of keeping Lena from speaking to the public. What are the chances? Something I appreciated about The Magnetic Monster is the time it spares for side characters. In this sense, it reminded me of 1954's Them, which I reviewed a couple years ago, where the protagonists are searching for something and tracking down reports, and that brings them into contact with some quirky eyewitnesses. Here, the trouble begins at a hardware store. The owner is beside himself because all the clocks are displaying the wrong time, and then his employees discover everything in the store has become magnetized. He's about to go out of his mind, and he calls the police to complain that someone is sabotaging his store with magnetic power. This happens early in the film, and I found the switch from the dry lab scenes to this hardware store with its somewhat eccentric staff reacting to some nifty magnetic effects a good change of pace. And it also lets you know that the movie's not as stuffy as it seemed at first. Later, we meet this delightful cabbie whose car has suddenly died. When he finds out that the guy he drove to the airport is actually a suspicious character with a dangerous briefcase, he takes it in stride and he's like, that's nothing. I drive around all kinds of crazy people. Just last week I had a guy traveling with a kangaroo. And meanwhile, the experts are like, okay, thank you, goodbye, trying to nudge him out the door. Then there's the chatty lady on the plane who won't stop talking to her neighbor, oblivious to the fact that he looks like he's collapsing in on himself, melting into the seat, could expire any second. And then there's the genius pilot who needs a tool to move a briefcase without touching it, so he takes a cane away from a blind man. Hello? Now his cane is contaminated! Use something else! The film doesn't go out of its way to emphasize these characters, but they're there, and they're enjoyable. And when it's not having a little fun with these regular folks, it's doing its best to be a suspenseful thriller, and it does a good job. It's subtle, but there's some spooky stuff. And once you get a handle on what this new element is capable of, it is a scary idea. I don't know how plausible it is. It's called Serenium and was created when another element was bombarded with alpha particles for 200 hours straight. I don't know exactly what that means, but apparently it was a bad idea. The way they speak of the element gives it malevolent anthropomorphic qualities. It's a hungry monster. If sufficient food is not provided, it will reach out its arms and kill. Amazingly, it's doubling in size every time it eats, turning energy into mass, which Dr. Stewart dubs the secret of creation. As all of this is being revealed, one of the cantankerous military men says, "This is ridiculous." And yeah, maybe it is, but when they explain it, it sure sounds plausible enough. To crunch the numbers, the team consults their electronic brain, known as the Maniac, or the mathematical analyzer, numerator, integrator, and computer. This might be the earliest use of a computer that I have seen on film, and it's based on the real Maniac, built in 1952 and used for nuclear weapons study during the Cold War. It's interesting to see the old technology that was used for running tests and studying materials. It looks kind of crude now, but this was cutting-edge stuff back then. Yet the presentation to the 1953 audience is matter-of-fact. It's not dumbed down. There is jargon, but it's not so technical that audiences then and audiences now can't follow along. And anyway, if you are struggling, you're not expected to understand it all. It's mostly there to make the plot sound legit and convince you that the experts on screen know their stuff. I saw a blurb online that described the element as throwing off an enormous electromagnetic pulse. That's probably correct, but it's never called that in the film. This is 1953, and by then the effect had been observed and recorded, but I'm not sure if the term had been coined yet, and movie-going audiences certainly wouldn't have been familiar with it. We are, though, having seen EMPs and EMP attacks in other media, so if they had used that term, we would instantly recognize the implications. There is a point where I felt the film became a little more fanciful, and that's when the underwater power plant and the Deltatron were introduced. There might have been a real-world equivalent to that as well, but in the movie, it feels like the third act veers more into the fiction part of science fiction. It's exciting, though. A chaotic climax with Dr. Stewart in peril and one insane Canadian threatening to gum up the works, and lots of flashing lights, which would earn this movie a strobe warning if it were released in theaters today. The Magnetic Monster was written by German-born screenwriter Kurt Siodmak and Hungarian-born producer Ivan Tors. Siodmak wrote some classics like The Wolfman, I Walked with a Zombie, Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. He also directed a few films, including Donovan's Brain, which was an adaptation of his own novel. He is credited as the director of this film. However, if you look online, you'll find a different story. Herbert L. Strock was hired to edit The Magnetic Monster, and he did, but at some point during production, Ivan Tors became dissatisfied with Siodmak and asked Strock to take over. Apparently one of the primary issues was the integration of stock footage. Rumor has it that Strock directed the bulk of the movie, but Siodmak gets the credit. Soon after, Strock became a full-fledged director in his own right. He directed a lot of television and also more sci-fi movies, including the excellent 1957 B-picture, I Was a Teenage Frankenstein, which I thoroughly enjoyed watching last October. You can watch The Magnetic Monster on Prime. The picture is a little grainy, but it's not bad, and you can also stream it on Tubi. So if you're up for a classic, well-written sci-fi film that's off the beaten track, with a healthy balance of serious subject matter and entertaining side characters and dialogue, maybe you'd like to check it out. Those are my thoughts on The Magnetic Monster. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of this movie if you've seen it in the comments below, and I'll be back next Saturday to share what else I saw in April. Thanks for watching.